Military actions are in fact considered a legal crime. Carrying out the tasks assigned by the High Command, the soldiers commit robberies and holdups, arsons, acts of vandalism, kidnapping, and murder. In the vernacular of the military, these crimes are called differently: ambush, sabotage, undermining, capturing of prisoners, and destruction of the target. Despite this difference in lingo, the essence of these acts is one and the same. A military serviceman acts upon orders. He's not a person, rather an instrument. Giving the official status to the soldiers delegates him the right to seek and destroy the enemy, and in return the state takes responsibility for his actions. And at the end of the war, the entire responsibility for the consequences of hostilities falls on the shoulders of the military and political leaders of the state. The Russian Federation refused to recognize the fact that it used its army against Ukraine. Acting without recognizable insignia and an official status, Russian soldiers are in fact carrying out the orders of their generals, but they cannot relieve themselves of responsibility for the acts they committed. The fact is that Russia betrayed its own soldiers before the start of the battle.
Российских войск на Украине нет.
This is episode 43 of the program about the ATO, History of War. In 2014, the Russian Federation committed an act of armed aggression against Ukraine. The war has been ongoing for several years. Hot on the heels, we're following the course of this war and are tracking the links between military operations, diplomacy, politics, and economics. Our main objective is to try and understand how it was, and most importantly, why it happened. War destroys economic connections. This in turn leads to financial losses and a drop in the standard of living of people in general. Soberly assessing their low chances in open confrontation with the Russian Federation, the Ukrainian leadership in every way possible was looking for allies in the West. The West was also trying to find solutions to the conflict. It should be understood that a boiling coffee pot in Paris or a warm heating radiator in Berlin is the result of the joint work of the Russian gas industry, the Ukrainian gas transit system, and European business. And if any one of the elements of this chain would fail, then there will definitely be a crisis. In mid-January of 2015, the Russian hybrid army stepped up along the entire demarcation line in eastern Ukraine. Because of this, the peace negotiations in Astana were cancelled. On February 5th, 2015, in order to coordinate the next steps, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande arrived in Kiev. After the meeting with President of Ukraine Petro Poroshenko, the heads of Germany and France left for Moscow. The very next day, they had a similar meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This was the way the second Minsk agreements were born, where each of the negotiators defended their own interests, and the stake was the fate of the Ukrainian state. At the same time, fighting continued in eastern Ukraine. On February 6th, fighting continued in the area of the Bakhmut highway. As a result of an attack in Crimea, a Ukrainian tank was destroyed. The commander of the crew was killed. By return fire, the Ukrainian artillery eliminated around 100 terrorists near the village of Zhelobok. The main cause of the enemy's high losses was the inept command of the troops, as well as the total lack of personal protective equipment of the militants. In Debaltseve, it was possible to achieve a short-term truce for the centralized removal of refugees. The word truce meant a ceasefire along the Debaltseve-Bakhmut highway. The columns of buses arrived in the town. One was intended to leave for Bakhmut, while the second bus was for those who wanted to get to Donetsk, to the territory controlled by the militants. As a result, on February 6th, 600 people were evacuated and the total number of refugees was 5,000. It is noteworthy that in the direction of Donetsk, the buses left almost empty. It is also noteworthy that while offering people to leave to the occupied territory, the militants stormed the nearest checkpoint of entry and exit. The Balu checkpoint on that day was attacked by terrorists using artillery and tanks. 2 soldiers were killed in the battle and 10 people were injured. On the same day, a second attempt was made to unblock the Stanislav stronghold near the village of Ridkodub. Early in the morning, the 3rd platoon of the 2nd company of the 1st battalion of the 30th Brigade, supported by 2 tanks, moved on to storm. This unit was supported by 3 infantry fighting vehicles of the 3rd Company of the 30th Brigade, the scouts of the 128th Brigade, and the group of the 73rd Center of Special Operations Forces. The plan of the operation assumed the assault of Ridkodub and the creation of a corridor for the passage of columns with ammunition and the evacuation of the wounded. Company 2 of the Donbas battalion, which also had to participate in the operation, did not show up at the place. However, the division of the 30th Brigade launched an attack and penetrated the village. They succeeded in mopping up Ridkodub with counterblows in interaction with the garrison of a surrounded stronghold and inflicted serious damage and casualties to the enemy. The close battle lasted about 7 hours and ended in victory. Defending the independence of Ukraine in this battle, 2 soldiers of the 30th Brigade were killed. Ihor Novak, who was mobilized in August 2014 and a veteran of the summer campaign in the battles for Savor-Mohyla and Musinsk, Alexei Buslaev. By evening, the enemy had concentrated all of its forces on a counter-strike, and the reinforcement never arrived. Artillery strike was inflicted on the enemy cluster, and several units of military equipment were destroyed. However, due to the fact that there were no shelters left in Ridkodub, the assault group and the garrison of the Stanislav stronghold retreated through the fog. February 6th cost the lives of 18 Ukrainian soldiers. The enemy, having suffered unexpectedly high losses in the battles for Ridkodub, lost its offensive potential. This made it possible to hold on to the Balu stronghold, located nearby, and positions in the village of Kamyanka until the end of the defense of the Debaltseve Bulge. On the morning of February 7th, the enemy launched an offensive against Novogrigorivka. The plan of the operation was to take control of the northern outskirts of Debaltseve and go to the rear of the Ukrainian troops. In the morning, after the traditional artillery shelling, about 15 militants, with the support of 4 tanks and 2 IFVs, attacked the Ukrainian positions. As a result of the shelling, a combat reconnaissance vehicle was damaged and a self-propelled anti-tank complex was destroyed. A battle began, and as a result the enemy lost 1 infantry fighting vehicle and retreated. On the same morning in Chernuhina, about 40 militants with the support of a tank attacked Ukrainian positions. In a street battle, the enemy's tank hit the mine barrier, was immobilized and eventually destroyed. The positions were still held. The enemy attacked the Ukrainian positions every day, trying to seize Debaltseve. Artillery worked actively, shaking the Ukrainian defense. Not only were the forward positions shelled, but also the headquarters of the units, including the Sector C headquarters located within the city limits. On February 7th, as a result of this shelling, 3 soldiers of the 101st Security Brigade were killed, and the total number of artillery strikes on the territory of the headquarters on some days reached 14 times per day. On the same day, militants fired at the towns of Hnutove and Stanitsa Luhanska from mortars. In the first case, a civilian was killed. In the second, 3 soldiers. In total, 12 Ukrainian soldiers were killed on February 7th. On February 8th, the Russian terrorist forces attacked Novogrigorivka again. This time, 7 tanks and 2 infantry fighting vehicles got close directly to the village where infantry assault forces landed. There were about 40 militants. The latter started fighting the defenders of the Zozo stronghold, while the armored vehicles shifted north to the Ukrainian Zenit stronghold. The fighters of the 40th Territorial Defense Battalion did not flinch. The veterans of the Battle of Ilovaisk correctly used all available weapons. Within 1.5 hours of the battle, the Ukrainian soldiers, without suffering losses, destroyed 1 infantry fighting vehicle and 3 tanks. Another enemy tank was seriously damaged. Another tank was also destroyed by soldiers of the neighboring Zozo stronghold. In Chernuhina, street battles continued. The tank that was destroyed the day before created a traffic jam, which prevented the militants from attacking the Ukrainian positions with the help of armored vehicles. The whole first half of the day the battle went on distances up to 100 meters, but the position was held. The militants suffered losses. An anti-tank complex of Russian production was seized as a trophy of war. It is noteworthy that one of the militants killed turned out to be a citizen of France. In the middle of the day, a Ukrainian patrol plane Su-24MR led a reconnaissance mission in the sky over Debaltseve. This fact later incited a rumor about the presence of Russian aviation in the sky and even its striking against ground forces. However, Russian aviation was represented only by unmanned reconnaissance aircraft, of which only in the first half of February 2015 6 units were shot down. Continuing to storm the approaches to Debaltseve, the militants did not weaken their onslaught in other directions. On February 8th, Grad missiles were fired in the direction of Mariupol, and in at least one case the use of cluster munitions was registered. At about 6 p.m., Ukrainian positions near Mykolaiivka came under the firing of Grad MLRS. In addition to the destruction of residential buildings, positions were also affected. 4 soldiers were injured and 1 was killed. War in its classical sense has its own traditions, rules, laws and customs. These invented things are designed to protect civilians and prisoners of war from the arbitrariness of a person holding a weapon. A hybrid war is a war without any rules. Along with tanks, artillery and aircraft, information is also a critically important weapon. And it is not only about the gathering of intelligence information. The development of technology has allowed people to quickly create a certain information background. A cleverly fabricated illusion can influence decision-making by generals and politicians. A well-formed plot can incite hatred or fear in people. And a frightened person does not think. They instinctively fight against the first threat that they encounter. And there is nothing surprising in the fact that Russian journalists frightened their audience and then, without bothering to present evidence, blamed their sins on the Chechens in the 1990s, Georgians in 2008, and Ukrainians in 2015. Russian journalists literally feed their viewers with blood by broadcasting battles live on TV, demonstrating torture and interrogation. They work in the battle formations of the Russian army and without any problems gain access to the cruelest scenes of crime. Disguised as local militia, Russian soldiers spit on the rules and customs of war right in front of the camera eye. On February 9, 2015, Russian special forces cut the Kharkiv-Dozhansky highway near the village of Lohvinove and began to shoot the passing vehicles, and Russian journalists filmed everything on camera.